Where does true strength lie? In the impenetrable armor or in the keen eye that finds its single weak point? How can a massive army, glorious and formidable, be brought to its knees by a single precise strike? This is not a story of overwhelming force, but of surgical precision. Our narrative unfolds in 575 BC, at the plains of Yanling, where two superpowers stood ready for a collision that would reshape history. The southern powerhouse of Chu, with its vast forces arrayed in magnificent formation, believed its numerical superiority and dense ranks made it invincible. Their commanders anticipated a grand head-on clash, the kind of battle where brute force would decide the day. But the northern alliance of Jin, led by the shrewd Chinese commander Luan Shu, saw a different battlefield. He observed not just the shield, but the gap beneath it. He understood that to defeat a giant, one need not break every bone, only sever the right tendon. His genius lay in perceiving the fatal flaw in the enemy's impressive deployment. An overextended center, a vulnerable command post, a moment of distraction. He would ignore the strong limbs and strike directly at the heart. This is the crystallization of a timeless tactical principle. Bi shi ji shu, avoid the solid, strike the hollow. How does one find the one vulnerable spot in an otherwise perfect defense? This is the story of the Battle of Yanling. Bi shi ji shu, bi shi jia shu. In the Jin command tent, a revelation was taking shape. Chinese commander Luan Shu stood before the terrain map, his eyes tracing not the obvious strength of the Chu formation, but its hidden fragility. Their left wing is a bronze wall, he observed, and their right a forest of spears. But here, his finger landed on the enemy center. Their command banners cluster too close, their reserves are overcommitted. They expect us to attack the shields, never imagining we would target the arm holding them. Meanwhile, the Chu army performed its magnificent display. Thousands of Chinese soldiers marched in synchronized drills on the flanks, their armored columns gleaming in the sun, a deliberate spectacle of invincibility. Generals had crafted an image of uniform strength, never considering an opponent perceptive enough to discern the subtle disharmony in their battle symphony. Luan Shu's decision crystallized. He would feign engagement with the mighty wings, but unleash his elite shock troops in a razor-thin wedge aimed at the heart of the serpent. This was the essence of Bi shi ji shu, not to shatter the entire armor, but to find the single cracked plate and drive a blade through it. The fate of the battle would hinge on this surgical strike. With the precision of a surgeon's blade, the Jin elite chariot corps pierced through the Chu formation, while Jin's secondary forces engaged the mighty wings in feigned full-scale assault. The real killing thrust, a razor-sharp wedge of bronze and steel, sliced directly toward the enemy's heart. The Chu commanders stared in disbelief as their magnificent army began to unravel from the inside. Chinese chariots, driven by hand-picked warriors, crushed through the lightly defended command sector. The Chu generals had never anticipated an attack at their very core. Their strongest battalions were busy displaying might on the flanks, now too distant to recall. Within moments, the strategic masterpiece of Bi shi ji shu unfolded with devastating effect. The mighty Chu army, like a giant paralyzed by a single needle thrust into its nerve center, lost all coordination. Panic spread faster than battle orders. The elegant battle formation, minutes ago a picture of invincibility, now devolved into chaos. The Jin warriors, seeing the enemy's center collapse, redoubled their assault. The Chu sovereign's chariot was forced to retreat, abandoning the field to the jubilant Jin forces. In one brilliant, decisive move, the battle was won not by crushing the army, but by disabling its mind. As dusk settled over Yanling, the full brilliance of Jin's victory became apparent. Where traditional tactics would have demanded crushing the enemy's strongest units at great cost, Chinese commander Luan Shu had demonstrated a profound military truth. Sometimes the most powerful strike is the one that never meets resistance. The Chu army's finest warriors remained largely intact on the flanks, yet their army had been decisively defeated. The captured Chu generals finally understood their fatal miscalculation. They had crafted an impregnable fortress but forgotten to guard the gate. Their magnificent display of strength on the wings had become their own undoing. A classic example of how over-reliance on apparent power can create fatal blind spots. Meanwhile, Chinese soldiers moved through the battlefield with purposeful efficiency, their light casualties standing in stark contrast to the strategic significance of their triumph. This victory would be studied for centuries as the epitome of Bishijishu. It proved that true tactical genius lies not in overwhelming force, but in the intellectual discipline to identify and exploit the single point where minimal effort can achieve maximum effect. The giant had not been slain by 1,000 cuts, but by one perfectly placed needle. The victory at Yanling did not merely decide a single battle. It sent ripples through the art of war itself. Chinese commander Luan Shu's application of Jishu became a strategic archetype, demonstrating that the most efficient path to victory often bypasses the enemy's strength entirely. This wisdom was later enshrined in Sun Tzu's timeless principle. Thus, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. We see this Chinese strategic thread woven through history's tapestry. In the Han Dynasty's campaigns, where armies maneuvered for positional advantage rather than frontal assault. In the fluid strategies of later dynasties that prioritize disrupting enemy logistics and command over destructive engagement. Even in modern revolutionary warfare, the principle of avoiding strong points and striking at vulnerabilities remains fundamental. The true legacy of Yanling is this intellectual revolution. That conflict is ultimately a contest of perception and choice. It challenges commanders to see the battlefield not as a test of brute force, but as a complex system where identifying the critical vulnerability, the one thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire tapestry, is the hallmark of genius. This elevated warfare from a physical contest to a deeply intellectual art form. From these ancient battlefields, the wisdom of Bishijishu has evolved into a universal principle for navigating complexity. This Chinese strategic philosophy teaches us that in any competitive environment, true advantage comes from discerning where to engage and where to redirect energy, a lesson that resonates across millennia. In modern business, it manifests when companies bypass saturated markets to create new demand. In technology, when innovators identify untapped opportunities instead of competing in crowded fields. In sports, when athletes exploit openings rather than challenging opponents' strengths. This enduring wisdom connects with global strategic thought, from Sun Tzu's attack where he is unprepared, to modern game theory's focus on asymmetric advantages. The story of Yanling reminds us that the most elegant solutions emerge from understanding systems, rather than overwhelming forces. As we face today's interconnected challenges, this ancient Chinese insight offers a timeless compass. True power flows to those who perceive the vital patterns beneath surface appearances, who have the courage to avoid the solid and the wisdom to strike the hollow. 必是继续，必须技术。